October 28th, 1958, that the evidence clearly indicates that he was actually a member of Freemasonry.
Yeah, I've heard about that. What I'm trying to get at is, so the old Catholic ways are disappearing, and you have this new corrupt Catholic council coming in, basically with their own type of faith that's twisted. Is that about right?
Right. I think the key teaching that people need to understand is that they're promoting now is that it doesn't make any difference what religion you are, that all religions lead to heaven. This is the new gospel, false gospel that's been promoted, most especially from the last five claimants to the papacy that we point out are anti-popes. And what people need to understand is that in the history of the Catholic Church, there have been 40 anti-popes in the history of the Catholic Church. That means an anti-pope, by definition, is an uncanonically elected claimant to the papacy. And traditionally, there were anti-popes because there was a true pope somewhere in the world. But the Church also teaches that if someone, a claimant to the papacy, is a manifest public heretic or an apostate, if he denies obstinately a defined teaching of the popes throughout history on faith or morals, he automatically, ipso facto, loses his authority in the Catholic Church, and he places himself outside the Church. So he could claim to be a Catholic, and this goes for even laymen, priests, bishops, cardinals, or someone who would claim to be a pope. And Pope Paul IV actually wrote a papal bull called Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio. He said that even if someone seems to be elected by all the cardinals, if he can be shown to have deviated from the Catholic faith in a manifest way prior to his elevation as bishop or cardinal or pope, no layman, no person could accept that person as a legitimate pope. And so this is the same teaching that's taught, of course, by the Code of Canon Law, the saints, the doctors of the Church. St. Robert Bellarmine, for example, who was a saint and doctor of the Church, whose specialty was defending the papacy, he said that a pope who is a manifest heretic automatically ceases to be pope and head of the Church, just as he ceases automatically to be a Christian and a member of the Church, wherefore he can be judged and punished by the Church. This is the teaching of all the ancient fathers, that manifest heretics immediately lose all jurisdiction. And so these guys have no authority. It's just like, for example, someone who would claim to support abortion and claim to be Catholic. He's not Catholic. It doesn't matter whether he even says that he privately disagrees with abortion. If he supports it in any way, he automatically places himself outside the Church. And so this is the same thing that would go for endorsement of other religions, for example, because the Catholic Church has taught over and over again, has actually defined infallibly 7 times that there's no salvation outside the Church. And so that's why before Vatican II, for example, every single moral theology manual that you could find would say that if you went into a non-Catholic church and you actively participated, you committed a mortal sin. And that's why, like, interreligious prayer meetings, going into, say, a mosque or a synagogue or a Buddhist temple, these things were all condemned as apostasy from the Catholic faith. In fact, someone like St. Thomas Aquinas, who a lot of people have heard of him, he was a saint and doctor of the Church, he taught that if anyone were to worship at the tomb of Muhammad, he would be deemed an apostate. This was also taught by someone like Pope Pius XI in his encyclical Mortalium Animos of January 6, 1928, an encyclical on fostering true religious unity. He said, for the union of Christians can only be promoted by promoting a return to the one true Church of Christ of those who are separated from it. And he actually says in that same encyclical that he says, quote, this apostolic see has never allowed its subjects to take part in the assemblies of non-Catholics. And so we see this contradicted, of course, by Vatican II, the document Unitatis Redempta Gratio, number 15. It says that some worship in common with non-Catholics is not merely possible but encouraged. It's also taught in the Directory of Ecumenism of John Paul II, and we see this all the time, of course, now with Benedict XVI, who actually has a reputation of being conservative or viewed as a conservative by most people who purport to be Catholic. Nowadays, when we see him, he's gone into numerous non-Catholic churches. He went into the synagogue in Cologne, Germany on August 19, 2005, and actually recited the Kaddish prayer with the chief rabbi, which is the prayer for the Jewish dead. This is something that has never been seen before, and we saw him go into the Blue Mosque in Turkey, November 30, 2006, and hold his hands in the Islamic prayer gesture called the Gesture of Tranquility. And this is, of course, an act of apostasy, and Benedict XVI has also gone into other synagogues. John Paul II, for example, bowed and kissed the Koran on May 14, 1999. On March 21, 2000, when he was in Jordan, he made the statement, quote, "May St. John the Baptist protect Islam." And we see this all the time. In fact, I've actually gone through every single Vatican newspaper that's ever been published in the English language, going back to April 14th, 1968 to the present, thousands of weekly issues. And so you can see this basically on a weekly basis. They don't say that, they don't try to convert people. That's now expressly condemned. We see, for example, the condemnation of proselytism. They say that we should not try to convert non-Catholics to the Catholic faith. This is seen all the time. In fact, actually, the United States Conference of so-called Catholic bishops, this was back in, I believe, 2005. We have it in our video and up on our website. They put out an official document that, quote, campaigns that target Jews for conversion to Christianity are no longer theologically acceptable in the Catholic Church. And they put out other directives that we should not be trying to fish in other churches' waters, meaning that we should not try to convert non-Catholics to the Catholic faith. We had the Balamon Declaration, which was approved of by John Paul II in 1993, signed in Balamon, Lebanon, where he said, for example, to the Uniate churches in Russia, that means people who claim to be united to Catholicism that exists in Russia, they said that you should not try to convert the so-called Orthodox to the Catholic faith in Russia. So this is what we're seeing now. And so what people need to realize is that even if they make some so-called conservative statements, even if they change some aspects of the liturgy back in a more conservative fashion, the main thing people need to realize is that if these people who are even doing these things believe that you don't have to believe in Jesus Christ for salvation, you don't have to believe in the Catholic faith for salvation, all of it is a deception, a fraud, and worthless. And so this is really a new gospel.
So basically, this looks like it's tied in, because we did a show like a couple weeks ago about the New World Order, and this sounds like it is very tied in, because you know that faith does control people's actions, and people will do whatever they believe in, and religion is the number one form of control when it comes to people. So this does look like, and especially how radical changes are doing, it's like there's no respect of the old Catholic faith anymore.
Well, another thing that's interesting is that if you look at the way, and we show this in our videos, that they have set up many of these Novus Ordo churches, they actually look very similar to Masonic lodges. And as I was saying earlier about John the 23rd, we show him giving Masonic handshakes. The Grand Master of the Grand Orient Lodge of Italy said, quote, "As for John the 23rd, it seems that he was initiated into a Masonic lodge in Turkey and participated in the Istanbul workshops." The evidence indicates that many of these guys are actually members of the Masonic Lodge. And in fact, in the case of Paul VI, what's very interesting is that he wore this breastplate of the Jewish high priest that Caiaphas wore, who was the high priest of Judaism at the time of our Lord. And Caiaphas was the one who ordered Jesus Christ to be put to death by crucifixion. And so the ceremonies and customs of the old law have been banished by the Catholic Church. No Catholic, especially no priest or bishop, cardinal, or pope, is to wear the externals of the Jewish Old Testament priesthood. And this is explicitly stated at the Council of Florence, that all who follow the old law customs religiously commit mortal sin and are not in the least fit able to participate in eternal salvation. So Paul VI actually, we have numerous photographs. He wore this rationale of judgment of a Jewish high priesthood emblem, breastplate, numerous times, including at the close of Vatican II, when he visited Yankee Stadium when he came to America. He also gave, we show a picture of him giving Masonic handshake to the Eastern Schismatic so-called patriarch, and the evidence indicates that he was definitely a Freemason. In fact, actually, with the way that these guys were buried, in the case of, we have the photographs at least of Paul VI and John Paul I, they were buried in a plain wooden box.
Wow.
Now Jews are actually buried in plain wooden boxes. In fact, in the case of Paul VI, you can see, and John Paul I, there was not even a cross or a crucifix on their casket, this plain wooden box. The evidence indicates from what they've been doing and what they were saying is that they were the chosen of Freemasonry. In fact, in the case going back to John the 23rd, Angelo Roncalli, during that October conclave, which the conclave is where the cardinals gather in the Sistine Chapel and the Pope is elected, that another cardinal, at least one, was actually elected before John the 23rd.
So was that, would you say that was fixed?
What's that?
Was that already, they already knew who they were going to elect?
Well, right. What happened? The evidence that we have seems to indicate that another cardinal, at least this Cardinal Giuseppe Siri from Genoa, Italy, at least, perhaps one other cardinal, was elected, and then after he got the required number of votes and said, yes, I accept, that other cardinals stood up and said, we will not accept you. A note was basically passed threatening Cardinal Siri. In fact, Malachi Martin, who was a Vatican insider who died about 5 or 10 years ago, he confirms this, that there was a note passed threatening Siri that he not accept the election. And he was considered to be somewhat conservative. And so basically what he said at that point, now again, this is all from other sources, is that I'd like all the cardinals to vote again to make sure that this is a will of God, because various threats were given in this note. And they then voted again, and that's when Angelo Roncalli, John the 23rd, emerged on October 28th. He actually held, John the 23rd, a post-election meeting with all the cardinals, telling them not to say anything about what happened in the conclave, that there was something specific that they were especially not to talk about. I mean, generally you're not obviously supposed to speak about a conclave ever. In fact, if a conclave is operating according to the right rules of conduct, it's actually an automatic excommunication to discuss anything that happens in a conclave. But John the 23rd had this special post-election meeting really telling them not to say anything about it. And the reason why, of course, is because the evidence seems to indicate that another cardinal was elected. But basically, this whole apostasy has been predicted. In sacred scripture, St. Paul talks about how the great apostasy will take place at the end of the world, that the man of sin, the son of perdition, will sit in the temple of God, he says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. And the term son of perdition is an interesting term because it's the very term that was used for Judas by Jesus. In John 17, verse 12, Jesus says to Judas, he calls him the son of perdition. St. Paul says, the son of perdition sitteth in the temple of God. And so biblical scholars have looked at this, and they said that they believe that the Antichrist most likely, or is, going to